Hi, I'm Mike McGee, Content Manager at Course Report, where we help people find and choose the best courses to reach their career goals. Today, I'm joined by Cernan Bernardo, who's been part of Flatiron School story since 2016. First, as a student, making his own career change into tech, and now serving as a software engineer facilitator while also working as a senior software engineer. CERN is going to share what actually separates students who succeed from those who struggle, how to build portfolio projects that stand out, and the one piece of advice that will still matter 5 years into your career. These are all insights that only come from watching hundreds of students navigate this journey firsthand. So thanks for being here, Cernan. Let's dive in. You attended Flatiron School yourself as a student in 2016. So what ultimately convinced you to make that leap into coding?
Prior to transitioning into tech, I was a financial advisor and helping clients with their retirement portfolios and things like that. I was a financial advisor for almost 8 years. But the last couple of years into that career, I would find myself coming home, from work after an 8, 9 hour day and wanting to learn how to code. And I would go on, those websites like Treehouse or Free Code Camp, and I would enjoy like building these like sites using HTML, CSS, and I ultimately decided I want to make a career transition. So back in 2016 is when I ultimately enrolled in the Flatiron School boot camp, and this was also when my wife found out that she was pregnant with our first child. So career change, new child. 2016 was a big year, so it was a little scary because of that fact of like I'm changing careers when my life is also about to change in another way. But my wife was on board. She knew that I had that passion, so that's why I ultimately decided to take the leap into coding.
Wow, wow. Lots of leaps happening in 16. So what drove you to teach or mentor other students after, you made your own leap?
Yeah, great question. So obviously going through the boot camp, the goal is to get a job as a software engineer. But while I was going through the curriculum as a student, I would find myself helping other students as well. And, we're all going through the curriculum together, but I would find myself taking some extra time to kind of mentor my fellow student. And if I understood a concept and they asked a question about that concept, I would jump in and say, hey, do you want to spend a few minutes to go over that concept? Because I think I have a good handle on it. So, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed seeing that light bulb moment in my fellow students. So I decided after completing the boot camp, I do want to take a little more time and shift into a teacher role. And I think it was a little self-serving as well because it allowed me to dive deeper into the material because, going through a 3 month immersive boot camp, um, there's still a lot to learn because you're drinking from the fire hose, right? So I wanted to like make that consumption a little slower. And while I continue to teach, I further reinforced my knowledge in the subject matter.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. As having, some boot camp experience myself, we would say the best way to test if you truly understand something is if you can teach it to someone else. So with this, you've worn a lot of hats, even as a Flatiron student, but also like section lead, faculty manager. Like, how did all these roles shape the way you think about teaching and mentoring developers?
And I think progressing through those roles helped shape the next role in the chain. So obviously, I started off as a student, going and learning the material. It helped shape how I then progressed into the role as a teacher, and thinking like, oh, when I was a student, this is what I would have loved to learn from my instructor or my teacher. And then in the same sense, when I transitioned into a faculty manager, oh, as a teacher, I would have loved my manager to kind of explain how to teach these students, or so it's kind of like every role that I served, it helped how I performed the next role. And then ultimately, as I transitioned into a software engineer, it helped how I then mentored junior engineers in my current role. And again, take that same mindset of, okay, as a junior engineer, this is what I would have loved to learn, or this is how I actually learn the best. So let me try to apply that to to mentoring, these junior developers. So that's kind of how that's kind of how it shaped ultimately how I teach and mentor both students and developers.
So, boot camps have kind of different instruction models. So, what does it mean to be a facilitator at Flatiron School? Like, could you tell us more about the role? Like, how do you support students these days?
I think being a facilitator is a little different than being an instructor or a teacher per se, because I like to think of a facilitator as kind of a technical guide and a learning partner, for students as they move through the curriculum. It's not about just lecturing and delivering content, but creating this space for students, a space for their understanding and helping them connect these core software engineering concepts to real world applications. I'm not just saying like this is how this syntax in JavaScript works. I'm like, no, this is how you would utilize this particular concept in an actual real world scenario. And I think it's really also about supporting students and meeting them where they are. So I know that the curriculum is structured, but if a student is a little further back and maybe not understanding a particular concept, even though I'm supposed to cover, ABC or XYZ today, they might still be at ABC. So let's back up and let's focus our session on what you're maybe struggling with now. So again, a facilitator, the role, it's a little different than an actual instructor because yes, while I am delivering content, I'm not just delivering a lecture and then sending them on their merry way. It's more of a collaboration than a teacher student relationship.
I love the description of, less talking at a student and lecturing and more of a guide and learning partner, a collaborative experience there. So you've talked about what you have done as a guide, someone who's helped other students. What's the best way for students to use mentors effectively?
And I think that it kind of ties into the last question is the students need to treat their relationship with their facilitator as like this partnership rather than a source of answers, right? I think I'm my most impactful when a student comes to me prepared with specific questions, but also clear goals or any blockers that they have. But not just like, oh, I'm having a problem with this. It's I'm having a problem with this, and here's what I tried. So it's not just like, they're not coming to me with just the problem. They're coming to me with what they've attempted to try to fix that problem. Because I think that that'll also work well when they do move into that role as a junior engineer. If they encounter a bug and they approach a senior engineer, they don't want to just say, I have a bug in my code. Because a senior engineer is going to want to ask, what have you tried? Right? They want to say that junior engineer wants to say, I have a bug in my code. Here's what I've tried, and here are the two or three things that I've tried, and none of them have worked. Is there anything that stands out at you, or can we pair to debug this together? So I think using your facilitator as again a partner in your learning is important. And I think another important aspect is a student needs to be open to feedback and follow up on that feedback because again they're learning, they're still young in their journey, so they want to be open to whatever feedback the facilitator, again as junior engineer, what their senior engineer, the feedback they're giving them, because that'll allow them to grow in their journey.
That's such a valuable insight there. Even if you're in a class to learn, the thing you don't know. Like we're all in this class because we don't know something and we want to learn it, but yet you don't want to feel like you're the dumbest one in the room or whatever. Whereas like with programming, you learn through errors, you learn
Yeah.
through bugs, you learn through solving problems. And so that problem solving process is, I would feel more important than having the answer and showing your work there. Like you mentioned earlier, even in a 3 6 month program, you can only learn so much. It's really learning how to learn as
Yeah.
being the most effective thing, because once you leave that boot camp, now you have this tool, toolkit to then go learn more things there. So really appreciate you sharing,
Yeah.
just kind of like having, here's what I've tried. Here's what didn't work. Here's my process. Let me walk you through it. Do you see something I missed, or is there another strategy that I can try there? I think that's just really valuable insight.
And one thing I like to do every once in a while, if I'm sharing my screen and I'm coding out, some sort of solution, um, and I would also do this back when I was an instructor lecturing, is I would purposely make a mistake in my code, knowing full well it's a mistake, but then stumbling through, even taking an extra 2 to 3 minutes to debug, and then ultimately find out like, oh, it was just this simple, I'm missing, a closing parentheses, to let them know like even experienced seasoned programmers make mistakes and it's okay. Like, you're not going to be perfect every time.
I love that. I love that. And also what you mentioned about feedback, that's another thing that can be such a very like anxious experience for, especially for beginners. Again, that fear of getting something wrong and
Yeah.
knowing that someone else like knows you got it wrong. That's the opposite. You want to seek out that knowledge from someone who has more experience than you, and then follow up and say like, okay, this is what I learned and here's how I applied it there. I think the best, most experienced engineers are ones that have that beginner mindset, have that curiosity to want to get better. So, we've invested a lot of time talking about beginners and getting started. And here's how you learn. Say you've, gone through that, phase one of, picking up the basics, learning how to learn. How do you go from there to like grow into a senior engineer? Like, does it just take time, is it specialization, mentorship? Like, kind of walk through how you made it to that level.
I mean, certainly time did play a factor, but in my opinion, it was less about time or specialization alone, and it was more about kind of how my mindset changed over that time. Definitely experience mattered, but I think what really kind of pushed me, and accelerated my growth was learning how to think beyond my own code. And what do I mean by that? Early on as a junior, you're focused on shipping features, getting things done, closing tickets, and all that. And as I gained experience, I started to think more about things like trade-offs and long-term maintainability, how my decisions could affect both other engineers and me as a future engineer, the product, the business, and I became more intentional about asking why we were building a particular feature. Not just how. What's the intention behind this particular feature? Obviously, mentorship played a big role, both having mentors as a junior and then transitioning into actually mentoring as a senior, and mentoring junior engineers as a senior engineer. And as a junior engineer, it was very valuable to watch how senior engineers reasoned through the problem that they're working, through their ambiguity, how they handled particular bugs, and how they communicated, that those issues. That helped me become better, at serving my role. So I think a lot of that kind of factored in. It was more changing my mindset, and rather than just performing the work, asking questions about the, intention of the work. If there was a certain project, what would building out this feature do for the business overall? And I wouldn't be demanding about it. I would say like just knowing that context will help me kind of formulate how I build that feature.
Got it. So curiosity, understanding context, and kind of really expanding your aperture in terms of it's not just about pushing this feature to production, but why are we working on this feature? How does it fit into the overall product, the business value? To really understand that, definitely agree and love that insight. So building on that, you talked about your mindset and how that evolved to help you grow. Was there something like a skill you didn't expect to matter as much as it did in your growth?
Um, yeah, I think communication. I was like, oh, it's could be valuable to be a good communicator, but I mean, in my opinion, I think it's one of the most important skills. Is early on, I thought being a strong engineer is all about writing clean code, and, shipping code. But I think the ability to explain my decisions, to ask good questions, again, going back to that last answer, is like asking good questions about the purpose of a feature and giving and receiving feedback, working with non-technical stakeholders. So having that skill of being able to communicate clearly and in a very well defined way, especially in this world of remote. It's very hard to communicate effectively in text. We all have those communication tools. Yes, you can jump on a meeting, but I think the bulk of our communication is going to be in the written form, either through, whether it's Slack or email or things of that nature. So I think having very good written communication skills, it helps reduce, you know, rework or having to rehash and go over talking points again. It helps build trust, and I think it helps teams kind of move faster, in the overall development process.
It is so much different. Like the mode of communication, the medium in which you're communicating is so critical as well. Like, being in person, there's a different type of communication versus trying to communicate this over Slack or via email, or through a ticket response. Like these are different, places to communicate. So really focusing on improving your communication, it's very critical, especially as you grow into having more responsibility in your career there. So thank you for sharing that. So you've worked closely with hundreds of students over the years now. Are there common patterns you see in students who ultimately succeed, even if they struggle early on?
I think a couple of patterns that I've seen in the students that have ultimately become successful. Number one is how they respond to struggling, because I think 99% of students are going to struggle while going through their curriculum at some point, and it's how they respond to that struggle. And I think the students who ultimately succeeded were ones who saw that struggling as a challenge, and how can I overcome this challenge? Do I ask questions consistently, and even if they're unsure how to frame the question, like, if they're attempting to understand why they're struggling, rather than wait until they're completely blocked, like as they're starting to feel that struggle, reaching out. So yeah, that's number one, is like how they respond when they are struggling. Number two is the taking ownership in their learning, and um, treating anytime that they're confused as a signal that I should get help, and I not as oh, I failed in learning this particular concept. Students that revisit those fundamentals and going back to the README or the written lesson about a particular concept, or do they try to break things down and try to reflect on kind of what didn't work? So building those routines of taking ownership of your own learning, and like I said, that first thing of how you respond to struggle. So those students that exhibited those traits those traits translate well into an actual software engineering position. Because again, you're going to struggle and you're going to need to continue learning as a software engineer. The students that exhibited those traits are the ones that I felt went on to have success as a software engineer.
That's great. Persistence, perseverance, again, going back to earlier, the struggle, the bugs, the blockers are where the learning happens in programming. And so if you expect a smooth ride and to just learn and check the boxes, you're probably in the wrong industry and trying to build the wrong career. So on this front, with students, they're learning programming languages and frameworks that usually results in building some kind of portfolio project or suite of projects. You reviewed countless of these portfolios. What separates a good project from a great one in your eyes?
You know, a good project is one that a student follows the requirements and they produce something that worked. But I think that a great project is one that shows me how they think. And it's not just showing me the code. It's when I go through these projects with the students, I'm talking to them about their project, and if they can demonstrate to me clearly and explain why they made certain decisions and how they structured their code, like whatever trade-offs that they considered when building their project, I think that's a great project. So again, it's not just about the code; it's about learning their thought process. And if they can articulate that thought process and the decisions they made, I think that's a great project. And that it shows me that they really put a lot of thought into their project rather than just try to spit out, you know, something that satisfies the requirements. Obviously, it doesn't need to look pretty. I mean, yes, it's great when a project looks pretty and visually appealing, but it's more so that presentation of like, here was my thought process, here's what I considered. So I guess, yeah, great projects are ones that allow a student to tell a great story.
Oh, I really love that, storytelling aspect of it. Like both a good and a great project, you know, checks the requirements, but that intuitive way, that creative way of approaching those requirements to really expand not only like the students thinking, but even the facilitator, instructor, mentor of like, wow, even I didn't think about it that way. Especially probably, we haven't talked about it here, but students are coming from other experiences. Like they have, very unique backgrounds, and then they're coming in to learn these skill sets and applying things from their previous backgrounds, whether it's finance or art or teaching or sports, business, and seeing that kind of infused through this learning has also been something I've experienced, and it's very fascinating because like I wouldn't even have approached this problem that way. So when you see a confident student eventually becoming like a confident graduate, and then they start to be able to kind of have some elbow room in there and it's not just paint by numbers again, it's like, okay, I'm confident in what I'm supposed to do here, and I can also express a little creativity while doing it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, so what's the biggest change you've seen with your experience in the tech industry this year? Obviously AI over the last few years has made a really big splash. So a question that we've been wrestling with at Course Report is talking to bootcamp providers is AI versus the fundamentals. So from
Yeah.
your vantage point, what's the big change you've seen in the tech industry, and like how much should students focus on AI versus the programming fundamentals?
Um, I think, yeah, definitely one of the biggest changes this year has been how quickly AI has moved or transitioned to being like, oh, it's a cool little tool, like, oh, ChatGPT, I can ask it questions and it spits out answers. So how it's moved from being like this niche tool to an actual daily part of the development workflow. I actually use AI, in my daily development workflow. It's AI is no longer about experimentation. It's actually shaping how we prototype, debug, test, and reason about code. But that said, I think the core problems that we solve in front end development haven't really changed. So I think it is important for students, especially ones that want to focus on front end UI development, to still focus and master the fundamentals. The HTML, CSS, accessibility, JavaScript, state management, understanding how browsers actually work. I think that is what's going to separate the strong front end engineers from those that just rely on ChatGPT to spit out a bunch of code for me. So I think AI can definitely help you. It can help engineers move faster, but it can't really compensate, for not understanding when something potentially breaks, or not understanding the reasoning or the context, like we talked about earlier. Understanding the context for building out a feature. I don't think ultimately an AI can really truly understand that. So yes, while I do believe AI could be a force multiplier for an engineer, I don't think it'll ultimately be a replacement for engineers.
You touched a bit on how just AI has moved from being this niche kind of tool to becoming a part of your daily workflow. So, can you talk about like a recent project you've completed in your senior software engineering role?
Yeah, recently I completed a feature where I built out this onboarding workflow, for the app that I've been working on, and it was a multi-step onboarding workflow containing enrollment, authentication, and all of the multiple steps using a tool called XState. XState is a tool that models state transitions and events, so that the app's behavior is deterministic and less error prone. So it was really cool because I just learned how to use XState for this project, and I really enjoyed it. So that was one project that I really enjoyed, is building out this multi-step onboarding tool using XState. On the front end, it was a React Next.js application, and the back end was Node and Express. So just building that full stack feature was quite enjoyable the last couple months.
The beauty again of learning well into your career now, and like, all right, this is a new thing, a new opportunity to learn and to put something into practice and production. So you always be learning. So that builds into the next question of what skills or habits do you see junior developers most underestimating when they enter the workforce?
Um, I think one skill that they could underestimate, and this again goes back to like kind of what helped me grow as an engineer, is communication. Again, especially written communication. So junior developers, they're not just writing code, right? They they have to document kind of the feature they're building. So having very developed written communication there. They need to write pull requests and explain their thought process, their comments, if they're going to add comments to their code, being again very explicit and writing out those comments, async discussions again via tools like Slack and other communication tools. So I think that's one skill that they underestimate, is again having that ability to communicate very well, especially in a written format. Another one is asking questions early. Again, we always talk about like having that learning mindset. Ask questions. Don't wait. Don't wait too long to ask a question on something you're working on because you don't want to seem unprepared. Um, the sooner you ask question, the sooner you can continue to move forward. And again, I go into that. What helped me is trying early on to understand context. Again, even though you might be junior, you've been asked to build out this feature. It's okay to ask, like, what's the ultimate goal? Why are we building out this feature? Even as a junior, because again, it'll show, especially non-technical stakeholders, that you actually care about the thing that you're building, and you're not just like, you know, completing tickets or pushing out code. You are showing them that you care about why you're building that thing.
There are common themes here of, understanding context, communicate. Communication is important, kids. This is really the key, no matter what role you have there. So it cannot be said enough. So, what roles are your software engineering graduates best prepared for, and have employer expectations shifted recently?
I think students going through Flatiron Software Engineering program, they're best prepared for, you know, entry level and maybe even mid level developer roles, where I honestly think they can contribute day one, while continuing to grow. This includes positions like front end developer, full stack engineer, even back end engineer, depending on kind of where they want to focus on. I think what sets them up well is this strong grounding in practical skills, because they're building actual real world applications. They're working, with version control and Git, collaborating through GitHub. So I think kind of that's what they're prepared, for when they go through our program. In terms of kind of employer expectations, I mean, I think employers are still looking for engineers that write, clean, maintainable code. They're looking for engineers that still understand those web fundamentals. I think they really care about folks that enjoy problem solving. So problem solving, the ability to learn independently, and are definitely, team oriented and okay with team collaboration. So I think those are all areas where Flatiron grads tend to kind of show growth.
So, sticking on the job market, job search, what's one mistake you see new developers make during their job search, and how can they avoid it?
I think a common mistake that I see, and this is like, because I'm not really on the career coaching side, I'm not at that, working in that realm, but one that I hear a lot is, as students are going through their job search, they try to optimize for volume, um, instead of quality. And they just try to, like, oh, I applied to 50 jobs, today, or 50 jobs a day, and I haven't heard a thing, which can lead to frustration, right? But I think what they need to focus on is tailoring their application. Well, a couple things. They should focus on kind of the industry or industries, a subset of industries they want to work in, and focus on sending applications to those particular companies. But not just that, is it may take a little more time, but tailoring your application for each specific role. So even if that means, for each role, updating your resume a little bit to highlight the skills that you have that are tailored for that job. Sending out a custom cover letter to each company. So I think that's one mistake that I see, is, like, again, is that trying to send out as many applications as possible rather than focusing on a subset of companies, jobs that you would like to work for, and making sure that those applications are well tailored for those roles.
Definitely sound advice there of, quality over quantity, or at least the hybrid approach where you identify a few roles where you feel like you can, get your foot in the door and optimize your resume, your portfolio to best align with those job requirements and what that company is doing there. All right, final question for you: if you had to give one piece of advice to Flatiron students today that would still matter 5 years into their career, what would it be?
I think just sticking to the same thing is theme is always be learning. Like know that even 5, 10 years into your career, the tech world moves so fast. Technologies and frameworks that were popular 2 years ago are no longer popular today. So being open to learning, being open to experimenting, testing new technologies. You don't want to be stuck in the past, especially because the tech world is moving. Things are always changing. So yeah, I think always have this growth and learning mindset because that'll help you grow in your journey as an engineer.
Well, thank you so much for all of the advice and insights that you've provided. I think they're, timely, but I also think that they'll remain relevant no matter whether it's 2025, 2035, and beyond, of being curious, being open to feedback, communicate, and, really have a bias towards solving problems and understanding the why as much as the what you're building. So really appreciate your time here. I think those who are listening and watching will find this very valuable. So to learn more, you can read Flatiron School reviews on Course Report. This interview was produced by the Course Report team in partnership with Flatiron School. Thank you.